Today on BRStv, we're going to do a tank update and talk Seneye. Hey guys, my name is Ryan. Welcome to another week of the BRS 160, where every week we do our best to help you guys, members of the reefing community, enjoy your tanks and find new ways to explore the hobby. We do that by following the setup and progression of this 160-gallon reef tank. We had planned on covering the Vertex Cerebra this week, but with a holiday short week and sale, time was cut a bit short, so we're going to push that out a week. This week we're going to give you an update on how things are going with the tank, with a few quick notes on how the corals are doing, lighting, calcium, and alkalinity settings, update on some of the fish, particularly the twin spot gobies, a snail update, our thoughts on how the zeovit system is going, one of our mistakes, but since it's part of our controller mini-series, we're also going to include our rather unique thoughts on how the Seneye Reef Monitor has turned out. It's been about 8 weeks since we added all of our corals. All the SPS corals are doing extraordinarily well. Most of them have completely encrusted over the epoxy used to mount them, and then some. Many are already sprouting off new branches. Coloration on the small frags is awesome, and most consistently have their polyps out. In 6 months to a year, I think we're going to see them transform into some pretty impressive colonies. I think our T5 Kessel AP700 hybrid lighting solution also found that right hybrid mix of intense enough for SPS, but not too bright for LPS. We ended up running the 4 5-foot T5 bulbs from 9 to 5, which includes 2 ATI Blue Plus and 2 ATI Coral Plus bulbs. The Kessels are set to run a 12-hour cycle with pretty long dusk and dawn effects. They max out at 33% intensity over a 4-hour period in the center. This is a program we settled on in week 38 where we discussed mounting corals and used a Seneye par meter to adjust the lights to our desired levels, something that's difficult to do by eye. Without that tool, we probably would have adjusted by eye and ended up at 50 to 60% or more and likely burned some of the more moderate light corals. We'll continue to monitor growth and color and let you know if we make changes. Right now we're dosing 60 milliliters of calcium and alkalinity 2-part a day. Checking alkalinity every day and calcium weekly has been key to keeping these elements stable, and I need to add about 5 milliliters to the dose a week to compensate for growth. If you've never tested alkalinity daily before, give it a shot because you might be really surprised with how adding as little as 3 milliliters a day extra affects the alkalinity over the course of a week. To be honest, the ease of the HANA DKH checker is the only reason why I'm willing to do this daily. Only takes 60 seconds from start to finish. Some of you might be thinking 60 milliliters doesn't sound like much for a tank this size. Keep in mind that it takes 10 to 20 of these small frags to equal the consumption of one large colony, so consumption is going to grow exponentially as these frags fill out. It's also super common to overdose 2-part and not know if you don't test frequently. If you're saying I dose 10 times that and have fewer corals, you might want to take a closer look at your dose and testing practices. The fish are all thriving. The 4 anthias split off into 2 pairs. Each pair more or less hangs out on their respective sides of the tank. Both anthias and tangs have almost doubled in size, and the wrasse is just plain getting fat. We get asked a lot about adding multiple tangs to a single tank. A lot of reefers say you can't have more than one, which to be honest is a responsible thing to say to someone who isn't willing to do some research on how to do it right, but it's also completely false. Because we added both of these tanks at the same time and as juveniles, there's almost no aggression, and what little there is just them puffing out their chest, not hurting each other. If you want more than one tang, first do your research on the type of tang you're considering and the best way to go about it, but the general rule of thumb is make sure the tank is big enough, add them as smaller, less aggressive juveniles, and at the same time. Reefers in general run into the most trouble when they're trying to add additional tangs at a later date when there's already a large specimen in the tank who's going to aggressively defend their established territory. Many reefers also have luck with larger schools where the aggression is evenly distributed, similar to how 3 clownfish can be a bad idea. Adding 1 clownfish to a tank with an established pair is a horrible idea, but adding 30 tiny juveniles often has no issues as long as there's ample habitat and food. Keep in mind that anytime food is scarce with more aggressive species, there's going to be problems. Well-fed fish are much less territorial and more docile. However, I think I'm most happy about the successes we're having with the twin spot gobies. This is one of those fish I'm going to openly state is better off left in the ocean because a vast majority will die of starvation in the tank. They are sand sifters, which tend to be finicky eaters and commonly don't adopt to active feeding responses with prepared foods for a long time. That said, these and other sand sifting fish are super common in our industry, so knowing tons of reefers are going to buy them regardless of what we say, I'd rather share some information on how to keep them healthy rather than simply say leave them in the ocean. And to be honest, they're one of my personal favorite fish. They just look awesome and their movement is super cool. More or less feeding them is fairly easy. These guys came in super almost sickly thin, and they already put on a substantial amount of weight. All I do is put the power heads and vector return pump into feed mode, then feed a mixture of Canadian mysis and Hikari seaweed extreme to the opposite side of the tank to get all the more aggressive feeders over there and away from them. I then drop 2 cubes of Hikari cyclopods mixed with some reef chili and some small 0.8mm hatchery diet from Sustainable Aquatics into a reef chili mixing bottle with a 1/4 inch acrylic tube on the end connected with soft airline tubing, and then coat the sand with the food. It doesn't take very long for them to get more aggressive about feeding when they can sense the additional food in the sand. More or less doing this every day, I'm confident that they're going to have long lives in the tank. But that said, if you're not willing to put in the extra effort to feed them like this or a similar method, it's wiser to just leave them in the ocean. Of course, the downside to all this is all the extra food is going to end up as a nutrient issue very quickly in almost all tanks. So in general, I'd add even more caution considering a fish like this. That said, in our case, the roller mat does an awesome job of removing most of the uneaten food once the power heads in return kicks back on and sends it down the overflow. The Zeovit system is also going to ensure that we're going to have basically 0 nitrates and phosphate. Zeovit isn't a license to feed whatever you want, but I have to say it's really sweet to run a tank where you really don't have to be concerned about nutrients and the resulting algae. In general, I'll also say the Zeovit system is way less complex than everyone makes it out to be. More or less, all I do is pump the rocks once a day and spend 60 seconds dosing a couple products. There's some mystery to some of the KZ products, but to be honest, I think that's a bit overplayed as well. At the heart of this, all it is some rocks that directly absorbs and binds some amount of ammonia backed with some specific strains of bacteria that perform well at reducing nutrients with Zeobac. Zeofood, which helps that bacteria rapidly multiply themselves, and Zeostart, which is pretty similar to vodka or other carbon dosing methods to encourage rapid nitrate and phosphate consumption and ultimately consistently near 0 measurements for both. All the other additives are more or less just tools to add some biologically available nutrients and elements that corals can utilize for health, coloration, and growth. Main ones I use are the LPS amino acid and coral vitalizer for these purposes, but once a week I also add B balance and the potassium iodide fluoride. And just for reference, I'm not in the office on the weekend, so I don't dose those days or pump the rocks on the weekends, and there's absolutely no issues from that. While every day is ideal, it's not religiously critical. Time will tell with the real results and you can follow along, but so far I think I'd run the Zeo system on any system just because I like to feed my fish and not be concerned about nutrients at all. There are of course other ways to maintain low nutrients like this, but so far this is definitely my favorite, mostly because there's an actual system based around this, very clear directions, and an epic list of successful tanks backing it. Couple other updates. I have to say I'm pretty much done buying your typical turbo snails. These Trocus snails look very similar, but they not only seem to survive longer, but they're also much more aggressive algae eaters and way better at their job of keeping the rocks clean. Not only that, but they're way better at flipping themselves over as well. I strongly suggest spending the extra $1 or so to get a snail that performs better and survives longer. Couple other lessons for everyone. We forgot to put the lid on the overflow for a couple of weeks, and you can see the salt spray totally destroyed the paint. It's important to protect the walls, equipment, and everything from that salt spray. We also promised to keep you updated on how the elegance corals do. Sadly, both are not doing well. As awesome as they are, this is probably one of those species better off left in the ocean because it's not exactly clear what it is we can do to keep them healthy and happy. More or less, it's just a crapshoot where you can get lucky, but most will walk away losers. Watching anything slowly die is pretty depressing. Onto the Seneye Monitor. Straight up, a lot of reefers don't get the value proposition of the Seneye, or better put, why anyone would even want one. Open and honest, it was a bit hard for me to see to begin with, but now that we've been using it for a while, I can say this is something that a vast majority of reefers should consider owning. I know that's a huge shift from not understanding why anyone would want one to why almost every reefer should consider one, but I think once it's laid out, it's pretty compelling. The Seneye has temporary monitoring and continuous monitoring purposes. They're 2 basic temporary uses, par monitoring and properly cycling the tank. Biggest one of these is par monitoring. I think it's just become pretty obvious that at this point, the days of plug-and-play lighting like T5 and halides are done for most reefers. Our LED lights come designed to be tuned both to intensity and spectrum, and not tuned to what's appealing to our eyes, but to the spectrum and intensity that's ideal for the corals. There's just no way to do this without a measurement tool, because human eyes are one of the worst measurement tools out there. Light is the #1 most important nutrient for corals, and spectrum and intensity is going to have arguably the biggest impact on health, growth, and coloration of any single element or parameter maintained on the tank. There's no doubt you can get away without a par meter if you're a good guesser or have a lot of experience tuning LEDs under your belt, but at this point I just think it's one of the more valuable tools in any reefer's toolbox, even if it isn't something that you use every day. You almost certainly get better growth, more intense color, and reduced mortality by intelligently tuning your lights rather than just tuning to what looks good or guessing. So the big question is the Seneye par meter any good? Well, we all know that many of the affordable par meters struggle with the blue end of the spectrum. To combat that, the Seneye has basic spectrum measurement integrated into the sensor that uses in conjunction with the par meter to calculate a more accurate reading in our reef tanks, which are fairly blue. Just to give you a quick reference point as to the accuracy, we tested the Seneye's par meter against a $1,600 Lecor, which also requires a $750 probe and a $360 cord, which makes it a $2,700 sensor. No one expects a Seneye to be as accurate as a Lecor, but we would like it to be close. Well, close doesn't really describe it. More or less it gave us the exact same readings. At the highest intensity with the whitest setting on the Kessil A160, we saw 139 par with the Lecor and almost perfectly matched 140 par with the Seneye. On the bluest end of the Kessil's range, where you'd expect to see the largest variance, the Lecor was 131 par and the Seneye 129, so again, just a hair off. Even when we reduced the intensity on the white spectrum, the Lecor was 75 and the Seneye 74, on the bluest setting 49 and 47. Based on this quick comparison against the industry's best field tool, accuracy is not an issue, and at $199, it's just about the lowest cost option out there, which basically ends the discussion. Beyond that, it also measures lux, and with the web server calculates PER, which is a component of par, which is actually usable by the corals, and produces an entry-level spectrum graph. If you're looking for a par meter that plugs into a PC, this is it. So the reality is, after you tune your lights in, for the most part, any par meter becomes a fairly costly paperweight, and why most reefers have such a hard time justifying the purchase of one, even when they acknowledge that light is the most critical component of the coral's nutritional chain. This is where the Seneye again differentiates itself, because unlike other par meter paperweights, it's also capable of monitoring pH, temperature, and ammonia, which makes it an awesome tool for new tanks and monitoring the cycle. Now, you might not feel like you need anything to monitor the cycle if you're a pro, but I think anyone from a first-time tank owner to 20-year pros can get some value from using the Seneye in an $11 slide to be closely in tune with the cycle and how each addition of livestock impacts the biological filtration. Now, I doubt anyone would buy it precisely for this purpose, but if you already own the Seneye for your lights, I think basically anyone can justify the $11 for a pH and ammonia monitoring slide. This is where the continuous monitoring comes in. Basically, every experienced reefer has some method of continually monitoring pH and temperature, and the general line of thought is I'd rather spend that money on a true controller like a Reef Keeper or an Apex. Why spend money on something like a Seneye, which can only monitor these things? Well, I agree completely. If I could only have a controller or monitor, I'd always pick a controller. However, if I already spent that $199 on the Seneye as a par meter, it's pretty sweet that I can use it to back up my controller with redundancy and add additional email and text message warning system if the pH or temperature is entering a dangerous range. The ammonia monitoring is also a very interesting element. Again, at face value, it doesn't seem really valuable because so few of us test for ammonia, and the common thought is there's no need to. Initially, I had to agree with this thought process because ammonia monitoring is such a foreign concept, but if we really take a moment to think about it, we have tons of sensors on the tank, all trying to let us know if there's an issue with the tank, and there isn't a single one of them capable of telling us if something's actually dying. However, ammonia monitoring does exactly that, and it's not only going to tell you when something large died and rotting the tank and putting everything at risk in a really devastating cascading effect, but it's also going to tell you when somebody dumps an entire can of food in by accident or some type of contaminant impacts the health of your biological filter. In fact, ammonia monitoring really gives you a pulse on the health of the tank's most important filtration system. So that said, even after you implement ammonia monitoring, it will probably still not seem like a lot of value because 99% of the time it's going to report that everything is just fine, and monitoring ammonia accurately requires these $11 tabs, which need to be replaced every month, and it may seem like it's still pretty low value. Well, the temperature controller on my heater doesn't do much for a year or two either, and then boom, one day it saves the entire tank from devastation. Same thing is likely here. It'll probably be pretty dull most of the time, really just reassurance that everything is working as intended, and then one day it could easily be the difference between a tank crash and starting over or just losing a couple fish. No one, including myself, likes replacing tabs, but this is really the only method of accurately and affordably continuously measuring ammonia in seawater. Really no different than replacing pH, ORP, or salinity probes as they age, or replacing consumable test kits. The cost of even years of these tabs is still a tiny fraction of the cost of the corals and fish they're protecting. That's actual dollar value and not the emotional loss of losing a tank. If I walked in tomorrow and the tank crashed, I'd be devastated. Having the Seneye with ammonia monitoring and redundant temp and pH helps me sleep at night. All that said, well, most of you probably understand the value a bit more than 5 minutes ago. It is a unique product, so I don't expect everyone to go running out and buy one. But the next time you're thinking of tuning your lights intelligently, cycling a new tank, or adding additional layers of redundancy, give it some consideration because the Seneye does offer a lot more than it would seem. And for those of you that don't own a laptop or PC near the tank, they do offer a 15-meter or 49-foot USB extension cable or a web server you can run right at the tank. So last week we asked all of you how happy you were with the new Apex launch. This was a pretty hotly debated topic in the comments, but end of the day, almost half of you said that I'm holding out, but probably not that long. This week we're asking you, is a par meter worth the investment? So hit the I in the upper right hand corner and share your thoughts with the rest of the reefing community. As always, if you learned something new, do us a favor and hit the thumbs up, and don't forget to hit the subscribe button because you don't want to miss out on next week, week 47. Just a quick heads up for all of you, my wonderful wife Melissa is going to have our first child any day now, so I'm going to take a much needed break and enjoy that with her. During that time, RT is going to do something pretty cool related to the 160 with all of you, so be sure to check that out. I think you're going to enjoy the new series. Hopefully I'll see you next week, and we haven't totally settled on any names, so feel free to share some of your favorite names in the comments area down below. We might just use one.